Plato's philosophical contributions have shaped the course of Western thought, and his dialogues remain a source of profound wisdom. His works, through the lens of his mentor Socrates, offer timeless reflections on the nature of justice, virtue, love, and the ideal society. Plato's dialogues often take the form of conversations between Socrates and various interlocutors, in which the central figures probe foundational questions that continue to be relevant in modern times. Through the Socratic Method, Plato challenges the reader to reflect critically on their beliefs and assumptions. This method, along with his theory of the forms, his notion of the Philosopher-King, and his exploration of the soul and its immortality, provide a robust philosophical framework for understanding not only the world of ancient Greece, but also the society we live in today. The Socratic Method, the hallmark of Plato's philosophical dialogues, revolves around asking seemingly simple questions to expose contradictions in the beliefs of others. The most famous of these questions is, what is justice? Socrates doesn't merely seek answers, but rather strives to reveal the underlying assumptions that his interlocutors hold, often leading them to acknowledge their ignorance. This process of questioning is not just about uncovering knowledge, but about deepening the search for truth. In Plato's dialogues, this method is used to guide his interlocutors toward a more refined understanding of complex concepts. What Socrates ultimately reveals is that truth is not something that can be easily captured in simple definitions or fixed answers. It requires an ongoing process of reflection and dialogue. For instance, in the Republic, Socrates engages in a conversation with his interlocutors about the nature of justice. They begin by discussing whether justice is simply about obeying the laws of the state, or whether it is something more intrinsic. Through a series of exchanges, Socrates challenges their assumptions and leads them to consider whether justice is a personal virtue or something that can only be realized in a well-ordered society. The dialogue doesn't offer a definitive answer, but instead encourages readers to examine their own beliefs about what it means to live a just life. Socrates' approach, in this case, embodies Plato's belief that philosophy is not about providing easy answers, but rather about engaging in an open-ended process of inquiry. This emphasis on inquiry rather than dogma is also evident in Plato's theory of the forms, one of his most important metaphysical concepts. According to Plato, the material world we experience is only a shadow or imperfect reflection of a higher, eternal reality. The true nature of things, Plato argues, can only be understood by contemplating the forms, abstract, perfect, and unchanging entities that represent the essence of things. For example, what we call beauty in the physical world is just an imperfect manifestation of the true form of beauty. Similarly, what we consider to be justice or virtue is an approximation of the perfect forms of these concepts. To illustrate this point, consider the example of a piece of music. If you hear a beautiful melody, you might say that the music is beautiful, but according to Plato, the true form of beauty is not something that can be captured by any particular piece of music, painting, or sunset. Rather, beauty itself is an ideal, an abstract concept that transcends all physical manifestations. The music is merely a reflection of the greater truth, the perfect form of beauty that exists beyond our immediate perception. This distinction between the physical world and the world of the forms is central to Plato's philosophy, and it invites us to look beyond the surface of things to consider their deeper, eternal essence. Plato's theory of the forms also informs his views on knowledge and learning. In his dialogue Meno, Plato introduces the concept of recollection, which suggests that all knowledge is actually a form of remembering. According to this view, the soul is immortal and has seen the forms before it was born into a physical body. Learning, then, is not about acquiring new knowledge, but about remembering the truths that the soul already knows. This idea challenges the conventional view that knowledge is something that is simply learned through experience or taught by others. Instead, it proposes that the soul already possesses the knowledge of the eternal truths, and that the process of learning is one of rediscovery. This idea of recollection is connected to Plato's belief in the immortality of the soul, which he explores in Phaedo. In this dialogue, Socrates discusses the nature of the soul and argues that it is immortal. He suggests that the soul is not bound by the physical body but is eternal and unchanging, much like the forms themselves. The dialogue presents several arguments for the soul's immortality, including the idea that the soul, being non-material, cannot be destroyed by death. In this view, death is not an end, but a transition, and the soul continues to exist in a state of knowledge and purity beyond the physical realm. Plato's idea of the immortal soul ties into his vision of the philosopher as someone who seeks not only knowledge in this life, but also strives to understand the eternal truths that transcend the material world. For Plato, philosophy is not merely an intellectual exercise. It is a way of life that is concerned with the well-being of the soul. Socrates, in particular, is portrayed as someone who embodies this ideal of the philosopher. Even as he faces his own death, he remains committed to the pursuit of truth, and his calm acceptance of death is a reflection of his belief that the soul is immortal and that death is merely a release from the physical body. In the Symposium, Plato explores the nature of love, presenting it not just as physical attraction, but as a journey toward the contemplation of the forms. In this dialogue, the character of Socrates presents love as a ladder of ascent, beginning with physical attraction to beautiful bodies and culminating in the appreciation of the form of beauty itself. Love, in this sense, is not just an emotion or a desire, but a force that drives the soul toward higher knowledge and truth. The dialogue's emphasis on love as a form of spiritual ascent challenges the conventional understanding of love as merely a physical or emotional experience. Plato's view of love aligns with his broader philosophy that encourages individuals to move beyond the transient and material world toward the eternal and unchanging truths. This philosophical perspective on love offers a contrast to the often superficial portrayals of love and beauty in modern culture. In contemporary society, love is frequently understood in terms of physical attraction, romantic relationships, or personal satisfaction. However, Plato's vision challenges us to consider whether love is truly about personal fulfillment or whether it is, as he suggests, a path to something greater, an appreciation for the eternal forms of beauty, justice, and goodness. Plato's ideas about justice and the ideal society are also closely connected to his views on love and virtue. In the Republic, Plato explores the question of what makes a society just, ultimately proposing that justice in the city mirrors justice in the individual. He imagines an ideal society governed by philosopher-kings, rulers who are not only wise, but who also possess the moral virtue necessary to lead justly. These philosopher-kings would rule not for personal gain, but for the good of society, ensuring that each class rulers, soldiers, and producers performs its proper role and contributes to the harmony of the whole. This idea of philosopher-kings, while idealistic, raises important questions about leadership and governance. In today's world, political leaders are often chosen for their popularity or their ability to navigate the complexities of modern politics. Plato's ideal ruler, however, would be someone who possesses true wisdom and moral virtue, someone who seeks the common good rather than personal power. In many ways, Plato's vision serves as a critique of the political systems in his own time and, by extension, offers a lens through which we can evaluate the leadership of our own societies. While Plato's The Republic outlines a vision of the ideal society, his later dialogue, The Laws, presents a more pragmatic view of governance. In The Laws, Plato acknowledges that the philosopher-king may be an unattainable ideal and turns his attention to how a just society might be created through a system of laws and institutions. The dialogue imagines a society where laws are designed not only to promote social order, but also to foster the moral and intellectual development of its citizens. In contrast to the utopian vision of the Republic, The Laws reflects a more conservative and practical approach to political life, one that takes into account the imperfections of human nature. This shift in Plato's thinking suggests that, while the ideal of the philosopher-king may be unattainable, the pursuit of justice through a system of laws remains a central concern. The idea of laws as instruments for promoting moral development also ties into Plato's broader concern with the soul and its moral education. Just as individuals must cultivate their souls through philosophical inquiry and self-examination, so too must societies develop institutions that nurture the moral and intellectual growth of their citizens. Through these various dialogues, Plato presents a comprehensive vision of how individuals and societies can strive toward justice, virtue, and wisdom. His exploration of the nature of love, knowledge, and the soul invites us to reconsider our assumptions about the world and our place in it. In a world that often seems chaotic and divided, Plato's philosophy encourages us to seek deeper truths, to question our assumptions, and to live in accordance with the ideals of justice and wisdom. In essence, Plato's dialogues offer not just abstract theories, but practical wisdom for living a good life. His works challenge us to think critically about our values, our relationships, and our role in society, whether we are grappling with personal dilemmas, ethical questions, or societal issues. Plato's ideas provide a framework for exploring the most fundamental questions of human existence. Through the study of Plato's dialogues, we can cultivate a deeper understanding of ourselves and the world around us. And in doing so, we can strive to live more justly, more wisely, and more fully. Plato's dialogues, particularly those involving Socrates, highlight the importance of the Socratic Method, a technique that emphasizes questioning over providing answers. At first glance, the method may seem deceptively simple. Socrates doesn't present ready-made answers, but instead asks questions like, what is justice? Or, what is virtue? These questions seem straightforward, but are designed to expose the assumptions underlying common beliefs. The Socratic Method's true power lies not in finding easy answers, but in forcing people to confront their own assumptions and beliefs, and to critically examine the foundations of their convictions. In the Republic, Socrates asks his interlocutors to define justice, which leads to an extended dialogue about the nature of justice in both individuals and society. Socrates pushes them to think beyond their initial, often superficial definitions. Is justice simply about individual rights or social order? Or is it something more complex? Throughout this process, the interlocutors' responses reveal contradictions and gaps in their reasoning, forcing them to reconsider their positions. In doing so, Socrates exemplifies how philosophy is less about obtaining definitive answers and more about the continuous search for clarity and understanding. Socrates' approach is far from a simple intellectual exercise. It's a way of encouraging deeper self-reflection. In a world where we often take for granted what we believe is right or wrong, this method encourages us to ask questions about the very assumptions we hold. For instance, in everyday life, we rarely challenge our own moral or ethical beliefs. We simply accept them as truths. Yet, the Socratic Method asks us to confront our assumptions. Why do we believe something is right or wrong? What experiences have shaped these beliefs? Socrates doesn't give us the answers. He helps us recognize the complexities of our own thinking. In doing so, we are led toward greater self-awareness and clarity in our decision-making. For example, when facing a moral dilemma, say, whether it is justifiable to lie to protect someone's feelings, one might initially think it is okay to tell a white lie. But applying the Socratic Method, we must ask, what is the purpose of truth? What does lying say about our integrity? Are we using our judgment to serve a higher ethical standard? Or are we simply trying to avoid conflict? By questioning our own assumptions, we come closer to understanding the deeper moral principles involved, instead of just accepting what feels right in the moment. In our daily lives, especially in the age of social media and rapid information sharing, we rarely pause to question our assumptions. We may quickly form opinions based on a headline or a passing conversation without fully engaging with the deeper truths or contradictions within those ideas. The Socratic Method offers a reminder that we must not only question others, but also ourselves. It's a call for intellectual humility, recognizing that we may not always be as certain as we think, and that our beliefs are worth examining deeply. Moreover, this method goes beyond merely identifying contradictions. It encourages dialogue, the exchange of ideas, and the mutual pursuit of understanding. Socrates never simply condemns his interlocutors for their lack of knowledge. Instead, he seeks to lead them, step by step, to a clearer understanding of themselves and the world. This dialogical approach to learning is one of the most valuable aspects of the Socratic method, because it shows that wisdom is not something that can be handed down from teacher to student. Rather, it emerges from a collaborative, critical inquiry. Socrates' method also emphasizes the importance of clarity in our thinking. Often, people hold beliefs that are vague or contradictory, but because these beliefs have become ingrained in their lives, they never stop to question them. The Socratic method forces us to articulate our beliefs more clearly. If we can't explain why we believe something, it might be a signal that we don't fully understand the belief ourselves. This is crucial not only in philosophy but in any area of life, whether in politics, relationships, or personal values. It's all too easy to rely on slogans or emotional reactions to guide our decisions. But Socrates teaches us the importance of articulating our beliefs with clarity and reason. In modern times, this method can be applied in various contexts, such as education, professional environments, and personal development. For example, in leadership, the Socratic method can be used to challenge assumptions within teams or organizations. Instead of simply directing people, a good leader might ask probing questions to encourage critical thinking, pushing team members to reflect on their actions, motivations, and goals. In this way, the Socratic method fosters a culture of self-awareness and accountability. The leader isn't the one with all the answers, but rather someone who encourages reflection and helps others arrive at insights on their own. The Socratic method, however, is not just about asking questions for the sake of it. It's about fostering genuine dialogue and being open to change. There's a humility in the method and understanding that we don't have all the answers, and that true wisdom comes from being open to reconsidering our beliefs. In this way, the Socratic method offers a framework for lifelong learning, where growth comes not from accumulating knowledge but from continuously questioning and refining our understanding of the world. This humility, paired with a commitment to dialogue and critical examination, is what makes the Socratic method so valuable. Another powerful lesson that comes from the Socratic method is the importance of patience and persistence. In many of Plato's dialogues, Socrates' questioning doesn't lead to immediate answers. His interlocutors often grow frustrated or confused, but Socrates remains calm, leading them through a process of reflection that can take time. This mirrors the real-life process of learning, where clarity often comes gradually rather than all at once. The Socratic method teaches us that finding truth is a gradual process that requires both intellectual rigor and patience. One of the most important insights Socrates offers is the realization that knowledge begins with recognizing one's own ignorance. In Apology, Socrates famously declares that the only true wisdom is in knowing you know nothing. This statement reflects the core of the Socratic method. By acknowledging our ignorance, we open ourselves to new knowledge and understanding. Instead of clinging to certainty, we embrace uncertainty as the starting point for true learning. This self-awareness is not just about being humble, it's about being honest with ourselves. By questioning our assumptions and beliefs, we come closer to understanding who we are and how we engage with the world. The Socratic method offers a kind of intellectual honesty that cuts through the noise of everyday life and forces us to face the reality of our own thinking. It's easy to live in a bubble, surrounded by people who share our views and opinions. But Socrates challenges us to step outside that bubble and truly examine the foundations of our worldview. In a broader societal context, the Socratic method has the potential to transform political and social discourse. In a world that is increasingly polarized, where conversations often become hostile rather than productive, the Socratic method offers a model for constructive dialogue. Rather than shouting over one another or clinging to entrenched views, people can engage in Socratic questioning, encouraging others to clarify their reasoning, explore alternative perspectives, and challenge their own assumptions. In this way, the Socratic method becomes a tool not just for personal growth, but for social cohesion and understanding. In conclusion, the Socratic method is more than just a philosophical technique. It's a way of life. It invites us to question everything, especially the things we take for granted. By engaging in this process of inquiry, we can not only deepen our understanding of ourselves, but also contribute to more thoughtful, meaningful conversations in all areas of life. Whether in our personal relationships, professional endeavors, or political discussions, the Socratic Method provides a framework for continuous learning, critical thinking, and growth. It teaches us that wisdom is not about having all the answers, but about asking the right questions. And, ultimately, it is through questioning that we come to better understand the complexities of life and the world around us. In Plato's dialogues, Socrates stands as a central figure, constantly probing, questioning, and encouraging his interlocutors to examine their beliefs and assumptions through a method that, at first glance, appears deceptively simple. This method, known as the Socratic Method, involves asking fundamental, seemingly straightforward questions such as, "What is justice?" or "What is virtue?" But its true depth lies in the way these questions challenge the respondent to uncover the assumptions, contradictions, and gaps in their own thinking. The goal of the Socratic Method is not merely to arrive at answers, but to encourage a deeper, more reflective understanding of the concepts in question. Take, for instance, one of the most famous dialogues in Western philosophy, the Republic. Here, Socrates engages his interlocutors in a discussion about the nature of justice. He doesn't simply ask, "What is justice?" in a way that invites a quick, superficial answer. Rather, he presses his interlocutors to clarify their definitions, challenging each response they provide and revealing the inconsistencies or holes in their reasoning. As the dialogue unfolds, Socrates leads them through a series of arguments that force them to reconsider their assumptions about justice, not just as a concept in the abstract, but as something intimately tied to how they live their lives. Is justice about the individual's rights, the preservation of social order, or perhaps something deeper, more inherent? By the end of the dialogue, Socrates has not only left his interlocutors with more questions than answers, but also invited them into a process of self-examination and reflection on what justice truly means. This questioning approach is far from mere intellectual exercise. The Socratic Method holds a mirror up to the thinker, forcing them to confront their own limitations, contradictions, and assumptions. It teaches that no matter how confident we are in our beliefs, there is always room for deeper reflection and understanding. It teaches humility, recognizing that we often don't know as much as we think we do. It forces us to ask ourselves questions like, "What am I assuming?" or "Why do I hold this belief in the first place?" This is not just about finding the right answer, but about becoming aware of the assumptions that inform our thinking and the potential biases that shape our worldview. In our own lives, we often operate on autopilot, taking our beliefs, values, and assumptions for granted. The Socratic Method, however, challenges us to press pause and critically examine those beliefs. It forces us to step back and ask, "Why do I believe this?" or "What am I assuming when I make this decision?" Whether in a professional setting, a personal relationship, or even when forming opinions on social or political issues, this method can be invaluable in helping us think more clearly and more deeply. For example, if we are confronted with a moral dilemma at work, instead of immediately jumping to conclusions about what is right or wrong, we can take a moment to question, what are the underlying principles here? What assumptions am I making? What do I truly believe about fairness or honesty? This questioning process doesn't always lead to clear answers, but it offers a pathway toward greater understanding, self-awareness, and ethical clarity. The Socratic Method is as much about the journey of self-discovery as it is about reaching conclusions. One of the cornerstones of Plato's philosophy is his theory of the forms, which posits that the physical world we experience is not the ultimate reality. Instead, true reality lies in an abstract, unchanging realm of perfect forms. These forms are the idealized versions of things perfect, eternal, and unchanging representations of concepts like beauty, justice, and goodness. The physical world, by contrast, is just an imperfect reflection or shadow of these perfect forms. To illustrate, consider the concept of beauty. We may look at a painting, a sunset, or a person and say, "That is beautiful." But according to Plato, these are just imperfect instances of the true form of beauty, which exists in a realm beyond the physical world. In other words, The beauty we experience in the world is always subject to decay, change, and imperfection, but the true, perfect form of beauty remains eternal and unchanging. This theory extends beyond abstract concepts like beauty and justice to the physical world itself. Plato argues that everything in the material world is a reflection of a perfect form. For example, a particular tree is just a manifestation of the perfect form of treehood and eternal, unchanging concept of what tree is. The tree we see may age, wither, or change, but the form of treehood, the essence of what it means to be a tree, remains constant in the realm of the forms. At first, this may seem like a difficult or distant concept, but we can find its relevance in our daily lives. Take the idea of a perfect relationship. For instance, we all have an idealized vision of what a relationship should be, one based on trust, love, and mutual respect. In practice, relationships may not always live up to this ideal, as real-world challenges like miscommunication, jealousy, or personal imperfections create imperfections in how we experience love and connection. But in Plato's framework, that ideal, perfect relationship exists in the realm of the forms. It's the essence of love, an eternal, unchanging version of what it means to connect deeply and genuinely with another person. The relationships we experience in our lives are simply imperfect reflections of that eternal truth. In modern society, we often become disillusioned by the imperfections we encounter in our relationships, careers, or personal lives. We look at the world around us and become frustrated by how far it falls short of our ideals. Plato's theory of the forms invites us to understand that the world is full of imperfections, but that doesn't diminish the value of the ideal itself. In fact, it calls on us to strive toward that ideal, to better ourselves and our surroundings in the search for truth, justice, beauty, and love without expecting perfection. The theory of the forms can also help us see the world with greater clarity. When we encounter something beautiful, for example, we might reflect on how it relates to the perfect form of beauty. Instead of simply enjoying it for its surface qualities, we can appreciate it for its connection to something eternal and unchanging, giving us a deeper understanding and a sense of meaning that transcends the physical world. One of the most radical ideas that Plato presents in the Republic is the concept of the philosopher-king, a ruler who governs not out of personal ambition or power, but from a place of wisdom, virtue, and a deep understanding of the forms. According to Plato, only those who truly understand the eternal truths of justice, beauty, and goodness are fit to rule, because only they can make decisions that promote the common good rather than self-interest. The philosopher-king is a ruler who has transcended the petty desires and self-interest that often drive human behavior. Such a leader would possess not only intelligence and knowledge, but also the moral virtue necessary to make just and ethical decisions. Plato suggests that society would flourish under such rulers, as they would govern with the best interests of the people at heart, ensuring that each individual plays their proper role in society. However, the idea of the philosopher-king raises difficult questions. Is it even possible to find such a ruler? In many ways, this concept serves as an ideal, a vision of what leadership could be if it were truly guided by wisdom and virtue. In practice, it seems highly unlikely that any ruler would perfectly embody the qualities of the philosopher-king. Politics, by its nature, involves compromise, power struggles, and competing interests. The philosopher-king, in Plato's ideal vision, would be above all these concerns, acting solely in the service of justice. In modern society, we may look at the political leaders around us and wonder if any of them truly embody the virtues of the philosopher-king. Do they make decisions based on the long-term good of society, or are they more concerned with personal power or short-term gains? The philosopher-king remains an aspirational idea, something to strive for even if it's unlikely to ever be fully realized. Plato's vision serves as a critique of contemporary political systems, urging us to reflect on the qualities we value in our leaders and whether those qualities truly serve the greater good. Even though the philosopher-king may never be realized in its purest form, the concept encourages us to think about what makes a good leader. In today's world, We need leaders who are not only competent and intelligent, but who also embody moral integrity and wisdom, whether in politics, business, or other areas of life. The Philosopher-King concept challenges us to seek leaders who put the common good above their own self-interest and who understand the deeper, more enduring truths of life. This discussion on leadership is particularly important in the context of today's global challenges, such as climate change, inequality, and political polarization. These issues require not just technical expertise, but also moral clarity and a sense of responsibility that transcends immediate gains. The Philosopher-King remains an ideal, perhaps an unattainable one, but it is also a call to action, urging us to cultivate wisdom, virtue, and integrity in our leaders and in ourselves. Plato's dialogues ultimately encourage us to live lives that are aligned with higher ideals, those eternal truths that go beyond the transient and often messy world of everyday life. The pursuit of knowledge, justice, and virtue is not an abstract intellectual exercise, but a way of life, a philosophy that informs how we act, how we treat others, and how we approach the challenges and obstacles of life. Plato urges us to engage in philosophical inquiry, not for academic prestige or intellectual superiority, but for the sake of living a better, more meaningful life. He suggests that when we align ourselves with higher ideals, we are able to transcend the fleeting pleasures and distractions of the material world. By contemplating the forms and reflecting on our own behavior, we can work toward a more just, virtuous, and meaningful existence. This can be challenging, as it requires us to confront our own flaws and limitations. In the Republic, Plato imagines a society in which everyone plays their proper role. But for this vision to become a reality, individuals must first cultivate their own inner virtues. Justice, for Plato, is not just a concept that applies to the political realm. It's a personal quality that must be developed in each of us. Only when we practice self-examination and question our assumptions about what is just, virtuous, and good can we hope to live according to these higher ideals. In modern life, it's easy to become distracted by external goals, financial success, social status, or material possessions, but Plato's philosophy urges us to reflect on what truly matters. We are invited to ask ourselves, what is the purpose of life? What should we value? How can we live with greater integrity, justice, and wisdom? These questions are not just theoretical but practical, guiding us toward a life that is not just about achieving external success, but about cultivating a deeper sense of fulfillment and meaning. Ultimately, Plato's dialogues are not just about abstract philosophy or historical ideas. They are about how we live today. By striving to live according to the higher ideals of justice, virtue, and wisdom, we can build a more meaningful life for ourselves and contribute to a more just and harmonious world. The quest for knowledge, the search for virtue, and the pursuit of justice are not just lofty aspirations, they are the foundation of a life well lived. Plato's notion of the Philosopher-King stands as one of his most controversial and idealistic visions. Presented in the Republic, this concept imagines a society governed by individuals who are not only philosophers but individuals who possess deep wisdom, a profound understanding of the eternal forms, and the moral clarity necessary to lead others toward justice and truth. According to Plato, the Philosopher-King is uniquely equipped to rule because their knowledge transcends mere appearances and superficial desires, aiming to serve the common good rather than personal ambition or fleeting power. However, while this vision holds an idealistic appeal, it prompts the question, could such philosopher-kings truly exist in a world dominated by politics, populism, and practical considerations? To fully appreciate the vision of the Philosopher-King, it's important to recognize the philosophical foundation of Plato's argument. For Plato, philosophers were the only individuals capable of grasping the unchanging truths of the universe, the eternal forms. These forms, as discussed earlier, are the ideal and perfect versions of all concepts: justice, beauty, and goodness. Philosophers, through their intellectual pursuits, seek to understand these forms, and thus, they are the only ones who can know what is truly just, beautiful, or good. In Plato's view, Knowledge and virtue go hand in hand. The philosopher who truly knows what justice is will also act justly. Therefore, only philosophers possess the wisdom necessary to govern with true justice, because their understanding of what is just is not clouded by personal ambition, emotions, or ignorance. In the Republic, Plato describes a city-state governed by philosopher-kings, where the rulers have ascended from a class of guardians, individuals who have spent their entire lives training in philosophy, mathematics, and dialectics. These rulers are not power-hungry or driven by self-interest, but are deeply committed to the welfare of the entire community, guided by an unwavering commitment to justice and truth. Their leadership would not be based on popularity or charisma, but on wisdom, ethical integrity, and a clear understanding of the common good. But even though Plato's concept of the philosopher-king holds intellectual appeal, there are several challenges that make it seem far-fetched, especially in today's world. In modern democracies, leadership is often shaped by the dynamics of popularity and power struggles. Political leaders are frequently chosen based on their ability to appeal to the masses, their skills in public relations, and their ability to win elections, rather than on the depth of their philosophical insight or moral wisdom. In fact, many leaders today are criticized for their lack of wisdom, for focusing more on short-term gains, political expediency, and personal advancement than on the long-term welfare of the public. This raises the question: is Plato's vision of the philosopher-king entirely unrealistic in contemporary society? However, while the philosopher-king may be an ideal rather than a practical reality, we can still glean valuable insights from Plato's conception of leadership. The philosopher-king is not just an abstract, unattainable ideal, but a challenge to modern societies to rethink how we value wisdom, virtue, and moral clarity in our leaders. Consider some of history's most revered figures, such as Mahatma Gandhi, Nelson Mandela, or even Socrates himself. These individuals did not conform to the typical political mold. They did not ascend to power through popularity, political maneuvering, or military conquest, but through a deep commitment to higher principles: truth, justice, equality, and nonviolence. They led not because they sought power for its own sake, but because they were driven by a sense of moral and intellectual purpose. Gandhi, for instance, famously advocated for nonviolent resistance, inspired by a vision of truth and justice that transcended political and societal norms. Nelson Mandela fought for the dignity and equality of all people, even at the cost of his own freedom. Both Gandhi and Mandela, in their own ways, embodied the qualities Plato ascribes to the philosopher-king: wisdom, moral integrity, and a commitment to higher principles. While the philosopher-king may seem like an unattainable ideal in the modern political landscape, these leaders show that it is possible to embody wisdom and integrity even within the confines of an imperfect political system. In their leadership, we can see echoes of Plato's philosophy. They weren't simply reacting to events or catering to popular opinion, but striving to align their actions with higher ethical truths. Plato's concept of the philosopher-king serves as a call to seek leaders who possess wisdom and moral clarity, individuals who prioritize justice over power and truth over expediency. In contemporary society, however, the challenge becomes finding ways to ensure that wisdom is valued over fame, virtue over popularity. The philosopher-king's ideal model is one where leaders are not chosen because they are the most charming or politically savvy, but because they have the wisdom, knowledge, and virtue to lead. In our world, where politicians often seem more concerned with media soundbites, poll numbers, and re-election, Plato's ideal raises a crucial question: how can we ensure that wisdom, rather than charisma or populism, becomes the basis for leadership? This question is particularly pressing in the context of modern challenges: climate change, economic inequality, global conflict, issues that demand long-term thinking, moral courage, and intellectual rigor. Plato's vision of the philosopher-king invites us to ask whether the leaders of today are truly equipped to address these issues, or if their decisions are often shaped by short-term political considerations. This is not to say that all modern leaders lack wisdom or virtue. but rather that Plato's critique encourages us to think critically about the kind of leadership we truly need to face the challenges of the future. How often do we elevate individuals to positions of power because they can inspire a crowd or win a campaign, rather than because they have a deep understanding of justice, truth, and the greater good? Moreover, Plato's idea of the philosopher-king can also be interpreted as a reminder that leadership is not just about individuals in high office. In a democracy, leadership is distributed across society, and it is essential that citizens themselves are educated and capable of recognizing wisdom when they see it. Plato's philosopher-king serves as a model not just for rulers, but for all of us. It challenges each of us to cultivate wisdom, moral clarity, and a deep commitment to justice in our own lives. For if the foundation of a just society is based on virtuous leadership, then it is equally important that those in positions of power are supported by a populace that values wisdom, intellectual rigor, and ethical integrity. In practical terms, this means fostering education systems that prioritize critical thinking, philosophical inquiry, and the development of moral character. It also requires creating a political culture that encourages thoughtful debate, long-term thinking, and the pursuit of the common good, rather than the immediate rewards of popularity and personal gain. Plato's Philosopher-King, although an ideal, offers a profound critique of contemporary leadership and political systems, urging us to reassess how we select our leaders and the qualities we value most in them. Ultimately, Plato's Philosopher-King is a challenge for all of us, not just those in positions of power. It calls us to reflect on the nature of justice and leadership and to seek out wisdom and virtue in both our leaders and ourselves. While the ideal of the Philosopher-King may be elusive, the pursuit of wisdom, ethical clarity, and moral integrity is a goal that is worth striving for, both in the public sphere and in our private lives. In the end, Plato's vision compels us to ask, how can we live in accordance with higher ideals? And how can we ensure that those who govern us are truly fit to lead? The Philosopher-King may remain a theoretical ideal, but the principles behind this vision, wisdom, virtue, and justice are timeless, and they offer a powerful framework for building a more just and thoughtful society. In the Republic, one of the most powerful and thought-provoking ideas that Plato presents is the allegory of the cave, which serves as a metaphor for human enlightenment and the journey from ignorance to knowledge. The allegory is meant to illustrate how people can live their lives bound by ignorance, perceiving only a distorted version of reality, and how true knowledge requires a process of awakening. Plato invites us to imagine a scenario where prisoners are chained inside a dark cave, unable to see anything but the shadows cast on the wall in front of them. These shadows are the only reality these prisoners have ever known. They are entirely dependent on these fleeting images, and they mistake them for the full extent of existence. However, as one prisoner is freed from his chains and exposed to the outside world, he slowly comes to realize that the shadows on the wall are not reality at all. They are merely distorted reflections of the true world outside the cave. At first, the freed prisoner is blinded by the light of the sun, just as a person may be overwhelmed by new knowledge or unfamiliar truth. It takes time for the prisoner to adjust to the light, just as it takes time for a person to come to grips with the discomfort of learning new truths. The allegory suggests that the journey to enlightenment is not easy. It's painful and disorienting, but it is also transformative. Once the prisoner fully adjusts to the outside world, he understands that the shadows were mere illusions, far removed from the vibrant and rich reality that exists beyond the cave. This realization is profound. It's not just about gaining knowledge, but about understanding the nature of that knowledge, about breaking free from the false beliefs that once governed his life. In Plato's view, the prisoners in the cave represent humanity's collective ignorance, and the shadows on the wall are analogous to the superficial appearances and illusions that people often mistake for the truth. The outside world, where the freed prisoner ultimately finds enlightenment, represents the world of forms, eternal, unchanging truths that exist beyond the physical, fleeting world. The allegory is thus not merely about seeing things more clearly, but about undergoing a fundamental transformation of how we perceive reality. It's a shift from living in the shadow of illusion to experiencing the full, rich clarity of truth. The allegory of the cave remains a powerful metaphor for understanding the human condition and our search for knowledge, and it is disturbingly relevant in the modern world. One might consider how the rise of social media has created a parallel to the shadows on the cave wall. Just as the prisoners in the cave are confined to a narrow and limited reality, many people today are bound by the surface-level realities presented online. Social media often presents a distorted version of life, one in which people curate only the best parts of their day, crafting an idealized image that bears little resemblance to the complexities of real life. The images we see online are akin to the shadows on the cave wall, half-truths, projections, and facades that conceal the deeper and more nuanced aspects of existence. Take, for example, the way people often post perfect photos of their vacations, relationships, or achievements on social media. These images become the shadows that others see, leading to a false sense of what life is really like. Many of us know someone who spends hours scrolling through these carefully curated images, believing that the lives of others are somehow perfect or more fulfilling than their own. The truth, however, is more complex, more varied, and often much messier than these polished representations suggest. Just as the freed prisoner in the allegory must leave the cave and face the bright, disorienting light of the truth, so too must we confront the deeper reality of life beyond the surface-level images we are presented with. For instance, many young people today spend time comparing themselves to the seemingly perfect lives of influencers on Instagram or TikTok. These influencers often post images that are highly edited, staged, or designed to convey an idealized version of life. The constant exposure to these filtered images can create feelings of inadequacy or insecurity in others. However, just as in Plato's allegory, this image is merely a shadow, not the full reality. When we begin to recognize the limitations of these curated images, much like the freed prisoner comes to understand the limitations of the shadows, we can free ourselves from the unhealthy comparisons and start to seek a more genuine understanding of life. The allegory of the cave doesn't just point to the presence of illusions. It highlights the process of awakening that one must undergo to achieve true enlightenment. It's about questioning the assumptions that we have made and breaking free from the narrow confines of conventional wisdom. It's easy to get caught up in the distractions of daily life, whether they be the pursuit of superficial achievements, the influence of social media, or the pressure of societal expectations. These distractions, in a sense, are the chains that bind us. Plato's allegory encourages us to break free from them by challenging the way we think and perceive the world. In this sense, the allegory serves as a call for intellectual and moral awakening. It is not simply about gaining more knowledge, it is about transforming our entire way of perceiving the world and our place within it. True awakening requires a willingness to question everything, even the things that seem most obvious or self-evident. Just as the freed prisoner had to struggle to adjust to the light of the outside world, so too must we struggle to adjust to the discomfort that comes with confronting uncomfortable truths. It's easy to stay in the cave, to remain comfortable with the familiar shadows, but true growth and enlightenment demand that we seek out the deeper truths, even if they challenge our previous understanding of the world. On a personal level, the allegory of the cave challenges us to reflect on the shadows in our own lives. What are the illusions or false beliefs that we are clinging to? Are we living in a cave of our own making, trapped by our own misconceptions, fears, or attachments? How often do we rely on shallow appearances, whether in our relationships, our self-image, or our understanding of the world? And perhaps most importantly, how can we begin the journey of awakening to see the world for what it truly is, rather than as we wish it to be? One way to break free from these chains is through the cultivation of critical thinking. Just as the freed prisoner had to engage with the world outside the cave to understand it, we too must engage with ideas that challenge our preconceived notions and open our minds to new perspectives. This could mean reading books that push us out of our comfort zone, engaging in conversations with people whose opinions differ from ours, or simply questioning the assumptions that we take for granted. By doing so, we can begin to escape the cave of ignorance and move closer to the light of truth. Another way to break free is by practicing self-reflection. Just as the freed prisoner had to confront the reality of the outside world, we too must confront the reality of our inner lives. This involves looking inwardly, questioning our desires, our motivations, and our values, and recognizing when we are being driven by external forces, be they societal pressures or the influence of others, rather than by our own authentic understanding of what is truly important. The allegory of the cave also invites us to reflect on the nature of leadership and responsibility. Just as the freed prisoner may feel a sense of duty to return to the cave to help others see the truth, so too do those who awaken to deeper truths often feel a responsibility to share that knowledge with others. In the Republic, Plato suggests that the Philosopher-King, once enlightened, has a duty to return to the cave to help others escape from the shadows of ignorance. This idea reflects Plato's belief in the social responsibility of the enlightened, who must use their wisdom not just for their own benefit, but to lead others toward truth and justice. Ultimately, the allegory of the cave is not just a story about knowledge, it is about transformation. It's about the journey we all must undertake to move beyond the illusions that bind us and discover a deeper, more meaningful understanding of ourselves and the world around us. This journey is not easy. It requires courage, self-reflection, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. But just as the freed prisoner finds a greater sense of freedom and understanding by escaping the cave, so too can we find a richer, more authentic life by seeking the light of truth. The allegory of the cave challenges us to ask ourselves, what shadows are we clinging to? And how can we break free to embrace the full, complex reality of life? In Plato's Phaedo, one of his most profound works, the philosopher presents a detailed argument about the nature of the soul, its immortality, and the fated encounters after death. The dialogue takes place on the day of Socrates' execution and is a conversation between Socrates and his friends, who are deeply distressed by his impending death. It addresses questions about the afterlife, the soul's immortality, and how living a virtuous life has implications for the soul's future. Socrates begins the discussion by suggesting that the soul is immortal, an idea that stands in direct contrast to the prevailing views of his time. For him, the soul is unchanging, eternal, and unaffected by the physical world. It is distinct from the body and transcends physical death. Socrates argues that because the soul is immortal, it must continue its existence after the body's demise, embarking on a journey of either continued learning and development or suffering, depending on the life it has led. This view of the soul, separated from the mortal body, was not only a radical proposition but a deeply spiritual one. To understand Plato's argument, it is important to grasp his view of the soul in relation to the body. The body, in Plato's philosophy, is seen as a temporary vessel for the soul. The soul, in contrast, is the true essence of a person. It is the part of an individual that contains knowledge, wisdom, and the ability to seek truth. Plato's belief in the immortality of the soul is rooted in his broader philosophical system, which holds that true knowledge cannot be obtained through physical senses but is inherent within the soul itself. This knowledge is something the soul already possesses, and through the process of living virtuously, the soul can recollect or remember that knowledge. In Phaedo, Socrates lays out several arguments to support his view of the soul's immortality, one of which is the argument from opposites. This argument begins by observing the natural world, where opposites are in constant flux. Life, for example, is opposed to death. According to Socrates, the existence of life necessitates the existence of death, just as waking and sleeping are opposites that coexist. This cyclical relationship between opposites implies that the soul, in its essence, must be eternal, just as death cannot exist without life. Life cannot exist without death. Therefore, the soul must exist both before and after the body's life. Another important argument that Socrates makes in the Phaedo is the theory of recollection. This theory holds that learning is not a process of acquiring new information, but rather of recalling knowledge that the soul already possesses. In other words, the soul is born with all the knowledge of the forms the eternal, unchanging concepts that Plato believed were the true reality and through experience. The soul simply recollects or remembers this knowledge. This process of recollection is a form of divine wisdom, something beyond mere mortal experience. Since the soul can access this higher knowledge and continues to learn, Plato argues, it must be immortal, as it can never be destroyed. Socrates also speaks of the soul's immortality in a moral sense. He explains that a virtuous soul, one that has pursued wisdom and goodness, will be rewarded in the afterlife. Conversely, a corrupt and immoral soul will suffer. Plato's views on the afterlife are rooted in his concept of justice. For him, the life a person leads on earth has profound consequences for the soul's journey beyond death. The soul's fate after death, whether it ascends to a higher realm or descends to a lower state, is determined by the moral choices made during one's life. This connection between virtue and immortality further underscores the importance of living a righteous life according to Plato's philosophy. For many readers, Plato's argument about the immortality of the soul can seem both comforting and challenging. It provides a sense of continuity and reassurance in the face of death. For someone who has lost a loved one, the idea that the soul continues to exist after the body's death offers a sense of connection that transcends physical loss. If we view the soul as eternal and indestructible, the grief we experience when a loved one passes may shift from a sense of finality to a belief that the soul is continuing its journey elsewhere, learning, evolving, and existing in some form. Consider the personal example of someone who has lost a close friend or family member. If one were to embrace Plato's philosophy, the experience of grief might shift from one of despair over the finality of death to a belief that the person who has passed is now in a state of continued growth or progression in another realm. For Plato, the death of the body is not the end of the soul. It is simply a transition, and the soul's immortality is linked to its ongoing journey of learning and betterment. This perspective could bring comfort, especially in times of mourning, as it offers the hope of the soul's ongoing existence beyond the physical world. On the other hand, Plato's view of the soul's immortality also challenges us to reconsider the way we live our lives. If the soul is indeed immortal, and if its fate in the afterlife is determined by the choices we make on earth, then how should we live? For Plato, this notion is empowering. It suggests that the decisions we make are not temporary, but have lasting consequences. This could mean living a life focused on the pursuit of wisdom, justice, and virtue, not simply because it will benefit us in the immediate present, but because it will shape the future of our immortal soul. The impact of our actions, whether good or bad, extends far beyond our physical existence, affecting the very nature of our being in the afterlife. In today's world, where many people focus on material achievements or fleeting pleasures, Plato's teachings offer a significant counterpoint. The modern world often emphasizes the importance of tangible, physical success, wealth, power, fame, and material possessions, yet Plato challenges us to focus on the soul's development, its moral integrity, and its quest for truth. Whether or not we believe in an afterlife, Plato's perspective on the soul calls us to consider the lasting impact of our actions. What legacy do we want to leave behind? What kind of soul are we cultivating? One that is wise and virtuous, or one that is clouded by ignorance and vice? These are not questions that pertain only to life after death, but are deeply relevant to our present lives. For example, in a world driven by consumerism and the constant pursuit of external success, it's easy to forget that our actions have consequences beyond the physical realm. Plato's philosophy serves as a reminder that our lives are not just about the immediate results or material accomplishments, but are about shaping the kind of soul we carry with us beyond this world. A life of integrity, wisdom, and virtue contributes to the development of a soul that will fare well in the afterlife. In contrast, a life lived purely for self-interest and material gain may leave the soul in a state of immaturity, unprepared for the challenges it will face in the world beyond. Moreover, Plato's emphasis on the immortality of the soul brings a sense of urgency to the choices we make. If the soul is indeed eternal, then every decision we make in life carries weight. Each action, whether ethical or unethical, has a lasting impact on our soul's development and its eventual fate. Plato invites us to view our lives not as short, insignificant events, but as part of an ongoing journey that continues long after death. The decisions we make now have consequences not only for our physical lives, but for the state of our souls in the afterlife. This perspective gives our lives a deeper sense of meaning and purpose, whether or not one believes in the literal immortality of the soul. Plato's arguments in Phaedo invite us to reflect on the nature of existence, the importance of virtue, and the consequences of our actions. The soul, in Plato's view, is not simply a byproduct of the body, but a transcendent entity that continues to exist beyond the physical realm. Its journey shaped by the moral choices we make. Plato's philosophy challenges us to live a life that reflects the highest ideals of wisdom, justice, and virtue, not just for the sake of fleeting success in the material world, but for the sake of our eternal souls. In modern terms, Plato's view of the soul invites us to think about our lives in a broader, more profound way. Instead of focusing solely on the short-term rewards of material success or fleeting pleasures, we are urged to consider the deeper, longer-term consequences of our choices. In a world where it is easy to get distracted by the superficial, Plato's philosophy calls us to live with greater awareness of our moral and spiritual development. Whether or not one adheres to the idea of an afterlife, the timeless message of Plato's vision is clear. Our lives have meaning beyond the physical, and the cultivation of virtue is the highest goal we can pursue. The soul's journey is continuous, and it is in our hands to shape that journey through our actions, choices, and the way we live our lives. Plato's philosophy, with its intellectual depth and far-reaching implications, continues to influence the way we think about the world and ourselves. Even over 2 millennia after his time, his ideas were revolutionary then, and remain a guiding force for modern thinkers. One of the most striking features of Plato's work is his deep concern with truth, both its nature and its pursuit, and his dedication to creating a system of thought that would help individuals understand themselves and their society in more profound ways. His dialogues, particularly through the figure of Socrates, invite us to question our assumptions, confront difficult questions, and search for truths that transcend the everyday. The Socratic Method, which Plato introduces and uses extensively in his dialogues, serves as a fundamental tool in the search for knowledge. At its core, this method is about questioning, not just for the sake of argument but for understanding. It teaches us that the quest for truth is not a linear process, nor one where definitive answers are always possible. Instead, it is a circular, ongoing process of self-examination, intellectual humility, and critical reflection. Socrates' probing questions, what is justice? What is virtue? Do not simply seek answers. They reveal contradictions, challenge assumptions, and, most importantly, encourage us to continuously re-evaluate our beliefs and ideas. This method pushes us to consider our answers not just in the context of the world as it is, but in relation to the deeper, often unseen principles that govern it. When we examine Plato's dialogues, it becomes clear that his purpose was not simply to convey a set of beliefs, but to create a space for intellectual growth. In works like the Republic, Phaedo, and the Symposium, Plato is not offering simple solutions to life's most profound questions, but instead engaging us in a process of exploration. He presents philosophical problems, challenges us to think critically, and leaves us with more questions than answers. This is what makes his work so timeless. In a world that often demands definitive answers and quick fixes, Plato's insistence on open-ended inquiry is refreshing and, in many ways, essential. It teaches us to tolerate uncertainty and to embrace the complexity of life rather than seek simplistic solutions to difficult problems. Plato's theory of forms, a key component of his metaphysical worldview, encourages us to look beyond the physical world to see the underlying truths that exist beyond appearances. In Plato's view, the physical world is an imperfect reflection of a higher, immutable reality, the world of the forms. These forms are perfect, eternal, and unchanging. What we experience in the material world are mere shadows of these true realities. Take, for instance, the concept of beauty. The physical beauty we encounter in nature or in art is fleeting and imperfect. Yet, the form of beauty what Plato considers true beauty is eternal and transcendent. For Plato, the pursuit of knowledge is not about understanding the physical world, but about contemplating the forms, those ideal and unchanging concepts that represent the highest and most perfect truths. This notion of the forms is often difficult for modern minds to grasp, given the emphasis on empirical evidence and material reality in today's scientific and technological world. However, Plato's theory of forms can still offer profound insights into how we think about concepts like justice, love, and morality. The problem with many modern approaches to these ideas is that they tend to focus on what is seen or measured in the physical world. But Plato's philosophy urges us to ask, what is justice in its purest, most ideal form? What is love beyond the surface level of physical attraction or emotional connection? By contemplating the forms, we are invited to strive toward these ideals, constantly refining our understanding and aligning our lives with deeper, more transcendent truths. Plato's vision of the philosopher-king in the Republic speaks to another central theme in his thought, the relationship between wisdom and political leadership. Plato argues that the best rulers are not those with the most power or the most popular support, but those who possess wisdom and understanding of the forms. In his ideal society, philosophers would rule because they are the ones who understand the true nature of justice, virtue, and the good. While this idea may seem utopian, it raises an important question that continues to resonate today. What should be the qualities of our leaders? How often do we choose leaders based on charisma, popularity, or political maneuvering rather than wisdom, integrity, and virtue? Plato's Philosopher-King is not just a theoretical construct. It is a reminder that leadership should be about serving the greater good, guided by wisdom, not self-interest. This notion is particularly relevant in today's political landscape, where we often see leaders who prioritize personal gain or public approval over deep moral or intellectual conviction. Plato challenges us to reconsider what qualities we should value in our leaders. It's easy to be swept away by the superficial qualities of political figures, their charm, their ability to rally support, but Plato's philosophy asks us to look deeper. Are they guided by a genuine understanding of justice? Or are they driven by ego, fear, or a desire for power? The Philosopher-King is a call to search for leaders who embody wisdom and integrity, who will lead not for their own benefit, but for the benefit of all. Plato's allegory of the cave, perhaps his most famous metaphor, presents a striking image of how human beings can be trapped in a limited understanding of reality. In the allegory, prisoners are chained in a cave and can only see the shadows of objects passing in front of a fire. These shadows, they believe, are the only reality. But when one prisoner is freed and exposed to the outside world, he comes to realize that the shadows were mere illusions. The allegory is a powerful metaphor for how we are often limited by our own perceptions and beliefs, unable to see the full truth. In today's world, the allegory of the cave remains eerily relevant. We live in a world dominated by media, advertisements, and social platforms that often present a distorted view of reality. Just like the prisoners in the cave, many of us are content with the shadows, the surface-level representations of life, happiness, success, and love that we encounter daily. The truth, however, is far more complex and deeper than what we see on the surface. This allegory invites us to question the narratives we are fed, to search for the deeper truths that lie beneath the surface of things, and to recognize that our understanding of reality is often limited by our own perceptions and biases. By freeing ourselves from the metaphorical chains of superficiality, we can begin to see the world more clearly, understanding not just what is, but what could be. Finally, Plato's exploration of the immortality of the soul in Phaedo offers a profound perspective on the nature of existence and the afterlife. For Plato, the soul is eternal, unchanging, and indestructible. It continues its journey even after the body dies, either ascending to a higher plane of existence or facing consequences for the life it led on earth. This view of the soul challenges us to think beyond the material world and consider the lasting impact of our actions and decisions. while modern science tends to focus on the physical. Plato's philosophy reminds us that there is more to life than what meets the eye, whether or not we believe in an afterlife. Plato's perspective invites us to consider the importance of cultivating a virtuous soul, living with wisdom and integrity, and leaving behind a legacy that transcends our physical existence. As we reflect on Plato's philosophy, it becomes clear that his ideas are not just theoretical constructs but practical guides for living a meaningful, thoughtful, and ethical life. His philosophy challenges us to question our beliefs, to seek deeper truths, to prioritize wisdom and virtue, and to strive toward creating a better, more just society. In an age that often prioritizes surface-level success and material achievement, Plato's work offers a timeless reminder of the importance of self-examination, intellectual growth, and moral integrity. His ideas continue to inspire us to live not just for the present moment, but for something deeper, something lasting, something that transcends the fleeting concerns of everyday life. As we've seen, Plato's philosophy offers us timeless insights into how we should think about ourselves, our society, and our relationships with others. His commitment to the pursuit of truth, wisdom, and virtue still rings true today, and his ideas provide valuable guidance as we navigate the complexities of the modern world. Whether it's through the Socratic Method, his theory of forms, or his vision of the Philosopher-King, Plato challenges us to look beyond the surface, question our assumptions, and strive for a deeper understanding of life. If you found this dive into Plato's philosophy helpful and thought-provoking, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. We've got more philosophical explorations coming your way, and if you think someone else might benefit from these timeless ideas, be sure to share this video. Let's keep the conversation going and continue the journey of questioning, reflecting, and growing together. Thanks for watching.